Gather yourselves.
This is a wonderful welcome to California, and I'm honored to have been invited by this wonderful group. It's been very great work in the community. Well, as you know, I have been talking about racism, white supremacy for many years. That got started, because it's always good if you kind of see, well, where did this thing start? I am a general psychiatrist and child psychiatrist, practicing in Washington, D.C. I never thought when I was in medical school that I would become a psychiatrist. But there are forces in the universe that know what you're supposed to be doing, even when you think you're supposed to be doing something else. So I had finished medical school and was, by accident, I got married, thought my husband was going to be able to come to Chicago, where I thought I was going to do a residency in pediatrics. Well, it didn't work like that. I had to go back to Washington, D.C. at the last minute. And a colleague and friend said, well, Francis, you can do a residency in psychiatry and then go back to Chicago and do your pediatrics. Well, I tell people the lazy factor came in. Because when you're an intern and you have to work on 12 hours and off 12 hours and your beeper is always going on. And so when I got into psychiatry, and you didn't have all these emergency calls, so I said, I'm never going to stay up all night again. And so I stayed in psychiatry. And as I said, in medical school, because we were taught Freudian psychoanalytic theory, my brain computer said that does not compute. So I thought, no, psychiatry is not for me. But when I got in psychiatry, and I was at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which was a federal government hospital at that time, treating black patients and white patients. And I'm a third-generation physician. My father was a physician in Chicago. His father was a physician in Chicago who died in 1909, so that was a long time ago. So my training in my family, I have two sisters, and we were taught, you are getting an education, not to leave your community. You are getting an education to come back and help your community. So I was never supposed to go in. And so treating black patients and taking histories on patients, take histories on white patients, take histories on black patients, but right in the middle of all black people's histories, just like each and every one of us, everybody who's black, there's racism in your history and in your experience. And so I started thinking, well, wow, since I decided I'm not staying up all night anymore. And talking to the patients, I got interested in psychiatry by talking to patients. And then when I saw racism in the middle of everybody's history, I said, I have to understand more about racism. I went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And at that point, integration meant one black girl, one black guy per class. So I was the only black girl in my class. And interestingly, when I got to Antioch, older students would come and say to me, did Corey send you? Yeah, that was as confusing to me. Did Corey send you? I didn't know who Corey was. Corey was no longer there, but in other words, if a black comes, the former black must have sent you. It turns out that Corey was Coretta Scott King, Dr. Martin Luther King's wife. So at another level, maybe Corey did send me. But I didn't know who Corey was. I don't think that she graduated from Antioch. But to go back to when I was an undergrad, I thought I was a Marxist. I was all into Marxian theory, which was intriguing to me because Marx tried to tie everything up, but he was tying everything up around economics and class struggle. And I went home one day, sitting at the dining room table, parents and my grandmother and my sisters. So, you know, when you're 16, 17, 18, that age, I said, I'm a Marxist. And my grandmother said, the more education they get, the dumber they get. So then I got to training in psychiatry and seeing racism in the middle of black people's history. And I said, I got to understand racism beyond what Karl Marx had to say. And so they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So I'm training in psychiatry, looking for other answers because the training program that I was in, all white staff training, 2 or 3 black residents, they actually told us that black people didn't have the intellectual potential to benefit from psychotherapy. That the best you can do with black people is give them medication. Now that may sound extreme. That may sound extreme, but that's what is being practiced today. But in my training, that did not compute. So I was still looking for these answers about racism. I've read everything in the world about racism. I'm still looking. And so I was doing a fellowship in child psychiatry. And I would sit at my desk in the evening writing up cases. And I would get a voice. So when people say they got a calling, don't throw that away. I would hear this voice. It wasn't in here, so I knew I wasn't crazy. But it was an experience here. Go to the Black Power Committee meeting. It wasn't loud, it wasn't disturbing, it was just go to the Black Power Committee meeting. I didn't go to groups. Over and over and over and over again, I would hear this. So I finally went to a Black Power Committee meeting, and that's when Stokely Carmichael was in Washington, and all the people who had come through SNCC and the Civil Rights Movement, a lot of them were in Washington. And so after one meeting, we had gone to somebody's apartment, and people were sitting on the floor eating African food. And I hear a gentleman on the other side of the room say, racism is a system. And my brain clicked. It was like a light bulb going on. That was Neely Fuller Jr. Somebody has his book. Okay, the person over there has his book. So I started talking to Neely Fuller. He was not a physician. He was not a psychiatrist. He was not a college graduate. He was a guard at the Bureau of Engraving in the District of Columbia. But he had been writing about racism beginning around in 1954 during the Korean War. He said that he was on a radar site in Japan, you know, like way up on a mountaintop, sitting there. That was his assignment. And he said everything that was going on in the States, segregation, desegregation, all of that stuff didn't make any sense sitting on that mountaintop. And he started thinking, what we are dealing with is a total system structure. He had a suitcase that you could carry, orange suitcase, and he had all of these precisely printed. You know, the notebook paper that has 3 holes on the side. So he had all of this documentation printed. I had another friend who was doing a residency in orthopedic surgery. His name was Carl Hutchison. He's deceased. But Carl was doing a residency in orthopedic surgery. And he said the 3 of us would sit in my apartment, 743 Fairmont Apartment 106, and talk until 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, when you're that age, you can stay up till 3 and then go to work the next day. So we would talk and talk. Carl used to be a Marxist, and we, you know, back and forth and back and forth. And so I said, well, first of all, Carl was so impressed with Neely Fuller's body of work. He said, I will type this in between surgical cases. So he typed it. I kept saying, this has got to be, we've got to get this published. If anybody had told me you're going to work with some black gentleman 17 years to make certain that his book got published, but it took 17 years, and his book finally came out. But, and I hope everybody in this audience, I consider, is probably the most important thinking in the 20th century. Remember, Dr. Du Bois had said, the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line between the lighter and the darker races of mankind. So mid-century, that was in 1903 that Dr. Du Bois in his book Souls of Black Folks. Along comes Neely Fuller, 1954. And Fuller says we're dealing with a system. And that system was about the power equation of white power over non-white powerlessness. So that I used to say, but why would they do it? See, that's a psychiatrist and that's a 2-year-old child. See, children, you know, when they start talking and their brains start clicking, and so you say something to them and they want to know why. Why? But why? You know, when older people get tired, don't get tired anymore. You may have to say, I don't know the answer. But why is the switch that turns the brain computer on? You see, it's like cause and effect. If this happens, what is the cause? And so Mr. Fuller used to say, and I said, but why would they do it? And he would say, Francis, forget the why. Just, you know, learn what they do. And Mr. Fuller said that the system encompasses all areas of people activity. economics, education. He'd even put it in alphabetical order so everybody can learn quickly. Economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And that it controls patterns of thought, speech, and action. And to maintain this power equation, as I said, a white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. Well, I persisted in my thinking, like I tell my patients that a good psychiatrist is like a behavior detective. In other words, the patient presents with the problem. And so I feel that my job as a psychiatrist is to help tunnel deeply and help the person understand why the behavior exists, because then that's insight. And if they can grasp the why, then they have a stronger instrument in changing the behavior if they want to. So I persisted with why. And I tell people I was actually in my kitchen, 743 Fairmont, cooking and doing the dishes. And see, when you put that question in the back of your mind, and you're serious about the question, it wasn't causing me a headache. Your brain begins to pull in data to answer the question. And so, as I said, I'm in the kitchen, hands in the dishwasher, cooking, and the brain-computer printout came. Now, what came to my mind was that within this system framework, there were certain things that were constantly and continuously being said. One thing was that black people are supposed to be genetically inferior to white people. Well, if you read enough and stay in school long enough, you learn a whole lot of things. And repeat after me, reading is more important than watching TV. See, TV is what somebody else selects for you to look at. Reading, and if you fall in love with books and reading, then you go to bookstores, and you go to libraries, and you build yourself a library at your house where you have all kind of books that are falling on the floor and everything. But, you know, just going, like I would go to the library sometime and just stand and say, now, what books want me to pick them up? True. Do you see? And so you're kind of, and they call it the spirit guided, to things that you need to put your hand on and look at. And so I started thinking about things that I had learned. First of all, just a short period of time studying genetics. You learn that there are genetic dominant traits and there are genetic recessive traits. And the dominant always top the recessives. So I thought about that, factor one. I thought about people of color always being called minorities. But the facts on the planet that we live on, third planet from the sun, is that the overwhelming majority of people, 9/10 of the people on this planet, have colored skin. Colored by melanin pigment, which is a black pigment. If you have a whole lot, you look crystal black. A little bit less brown, a little bit less so-called red, a little bit less so-called yellow, and almost none at all, or none at all white. And so I said, well, wait a minute. We're not genetically inferior. Black is genetic dominant. People of color are not minority or minorities, but the vast majority of people. planet Earth. And I actually stood in the kitchen and I'm there by myself. That's it. That's the answer. That when people, I don't know if I can write on this. See, think about this as our planet. And this is North and this is Europe. And Christopher Columbus is known for starting the voyages coming out, white people coming out of Europe and discovering the planet. And I say that when they, you know, Columbus was the leader, and then other people followed him. And what they discovered was that everywhere there was colored people everywhere. That's the only place where white people were. And so if the colored people were overly generous with their hospitality, so the people had food and drink, and maybe some sex was thrown in. And if the men waited around 9 months, they discovered you gotta fly. But they discovered that all of the children ended up looking like their mothers. And they didn't have to have a fancy building to have a genetics meeting. But it became clear that if these men started going from south to north, there could be a problem. We could call it the Obama problem. You know, they call the fact that people started buying all kinds of guns after President Obama became president. They started buying guns. And they call that the Obama effect, but I call this the Obama problem, in that President Obama's mother's white, was white, his father was black. Because black is genetically dominant, he could only end up being black. You see, because of the genetic dominance versus a genetic recessive trait. And from that, I could see what the problem was. Neely Fuller said that racism was about maintaining the power equation of white over non-white. Well, this was absolutely necessary because the genetically dominant people of color could cause the disappearance of white. Do you see? And I concluded that's what racism is all about. That racism is a total system structure, structured by people who classify themselves as white, consciously and or subconsciously determined, controlling patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth. And upon which the vast and overwhelming majority of people are people of color. And all of the people of color are genetically dominant compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people. And unbeknownst to us, because people of color all over the world, wherever white supremacy has become the dominant force, and that's all over the entire planet, the people of color learn before they learn how to read. If you are black, what? Everybody knows that. If you are brown, if you're yellow, you're yellow. If you're white, you're white. Unbeknownst to us, because people learn that before they go to the first grade, that this is the color code for white genetic survival. The more color you have, the greater the threat. So that's why the darkest colors have to be, all the colors are fine, but most black is most beautiful. The other one says African genes, G-E-N-E-S, wear with pride. But I said, once you understand this, everything else begins to be clear. See, black people, as black people, we go around greeting each other saying, hey, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Because we don't know what's going on. See, the brain will always push. See, for you to function effectively, you have to deal with reality. See, God forbid if a fire was to break out in this building and we're all afraid of fire, so we say, oh, it's not fire, it really is roses. You see, then we will all burn up and we will all be dead. You see, we have to face reality. So I said, if we begin to understand this, everything else, and Neely Fuller has an expression, if you do not understand white supremacy racism, what it is, and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand, I don't care if you have 29 PhDs, will only confuse you.
That's right.
Because the system does not reveal itself. It lies. It says this is a democracy. Everybody is equal and everybody has equal opportunity. Well, this is what makes black people's blood pressure go up. Because we keep looking for that equal opportunity and not finding it. You see, because it does not exist. You cannot have equal opportunity if you have a segment of the people who with equal opportunity will experience genetic annihilation. Are you all following me? Yes. See, in other words, when Abraham Lincoln emancipated the slaves with the help of others, but if he had said, now the enslaved Africans are going to have social equality with all of the white people. So that would mean that everybody would just ignore color. See, everybody would be so-called colorblind. I say under white supremacy, that term means blind to the interests of colored people. You see, but if everybody just blended, we would have the Obama effect, and there wouldn't be any white people, other than the new mutations to albinism. In other words, white, this is not Francis Welsing's genetics. White skin is a mutation from black. It is the failure of the melanocytes, the cells that are given the task of producing pigment. If a specific enzyme called tyrosinase is missing, then those cells are there, but they cannot go forward and produce the end product of color. So now the paleontologists and anthropologists are not arguing anymore. Black people are the mothers and fathers of everybody on the planet. Black people and crystal black people, I'm talking about the highest level of black, is the only color that could produce all of the other colors. Because if you go from most black to a mutation to albinism, you cross the albinism plus most black, and you get all of the colors in the middle. like this audience looks like. This is not an audience that looks like West Africa. You see, in other words, these are all these different shades of brown because of the busy work of slave masters. Make no mistake. See, African women were not raping slave masters. You see, but slave masters were having a field day producing all of the colors and then going further and telling the people, I'm glad my grandmother, great-grandmother was raped because now I don't look black. I mean, this was the mindset, unbeknownst to people who were analyzing this situation in depth. Are you all following? Yeah. Okay. So I say that if we understand this key, and we understand that effectively we're like at a chessboard. You see where you have a white side of the board and a black side of the board. The object of the game of chess, because the white side of the board always moves first. So white is playing offense, defense. Black has to play defense, offense. The object of the game of chess is for the white king to checkmate the black king. Now, do we see this going on this planet? You see, the object of the game of chess is for the white king to checkmate the black king. But that is essential for white genetic survival. So, I decided after Charleston, South Carolina, that I would dedicate my lectures and remarks to the 9 black people who made a blood sacrifice for us to wake up. You see, all of the elements were present in that great tragedy. You see, you had a young 21-year-old white male who had written a manifesto laying out clearly that we have to kill you for us to survive. Do you see, and following it up with the often stated, only thing that the black man wants is to rape a white woman. You see, now that had to be at the center of the desire for white genetic survival. And it's fascinating to me how CNN just led the charge, so to speak. We're talking about racism, white supremacy, and what the young white male did in Charleston. And so now the news is just covered with Bill Cosby. You see, in other words, his action has been completely wiped off the news so that people can focus on the fact that Bill Cosby is supposed to have raped 40 women. Maybe it's up to 60 now. You see, but that just goes along with what white females say in the system of racism, that their ideal mate is tall, dark, and handsome. You see, Bill Cosby has not been charged with kidnapping. Now, I'm not justifying any mistreatment, but seeing the whole story. It's like a white male said to me, Dr. Welsing, do you know what white men say? And I said, no, I don't. He said, white men say they're not men. Until when? Until they have had sexual relations with a black woman. Now, see, once you understand racism, then all the things that you see see all the phenomena that look like they're not related to anything begin to become clear. See, even, they might start calling it Cosby candy, I don't know. But see, they even name candy, chocolate candy with nuts, as Mr. Goodbar. Chocolate candy is the favorite candy all over the white world. See, the darker, the richer, the soapy wrapper. See, this is the culture speaking. And one of the things in psychiatry, and especially what I'd say is old school child psychiatry, where you're taught to watch children in the playroom and watch their symbolic play with toys, to understand what they are really thinking about when they can't tell you. You see, so the symbolic things that people do, it's just like wanting chocolate kisses. At the same time, he's about to rape me. You see, all of this history, our history of lynching. You see, the history of justifying lynching was always related to the statement that a black male thought he wanted to think about looking at a white woman. Saying something to a white female would be the justification for tracking down the black male and lynching and castrating him. There's no history, none at all. There's no history of black men attacking white men's genitals. No history whatsoever. So we have blatant history of white males. Some people better be careful. White males attacking white males attacking black males. Can I wipe this board off?
They got the pan. Yeah, that's a pan. Y'all get away from it. Somebody breaks. It's a pan.
Again, everything that is important in the culture, you will find is tied to the understanding of what it is that I'm stating. And I've been sharing with people that, you know, no matter where I go, I could be in the supermarket and somebody might come up to me and say, Dr. Welsing, you're Dr. Welsing, aren't you? They'll say, you don't know me. I first heard you 20 years ago, and I knew you were crazy. But now I understand what you're talking about. See, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to kind of catch up. So one Sunday, it was so quiet. See, and when it's quiet, you can think. This is why the system of racism tells black people, your music is boom! You see, so loud that it causes sensory overload. It will cause the brain computer to really shut down. Like black people are in so much stress and so much pain that they really want something to knock it out. using sound as a narcotic, but that doesn't facilitate thinking. So one Sunday it was very, very quiet. And so I just said to myself, oh, it's so quiet. See, and that's when your brain can work. And then I said, wow, what's happening? And then it occurred to me that it was ball games. And I said to myself, there's something about ball games that is deeper than what we think. See, ball games are the most important activity in the culture. Well, see, if you are interested in genetic survival, then you got to be interested in this. This is not a man with glasses. This is a schematic drawing of male genitalia. Testicle, phallus, testicle. What is the colloquial name of the testicle? Balls. See, I don't make it up. So then I thought, oh, there are 2 series of ball games. Now don't tell if you read the book. See, this is something, the significance of balls. People are looking at balls all the time. The culture says, keep your eye on the ball. Yes, in parentheses. But we are not accustomed to thinking that there are 2 series of ball games in the culture that people are looking at all of the time, but they don't see it. See, if your brain is thinking, we're in a democracy, you won't see it. If you know that you are in a system of racism, white supremacy, that is about white genetic survival, then you might see these 2 series. The 2 series, and they're not made up by Francis Welsing, and they're not made up by any black person. This is coming out of the white brain computer because it refuses to talk about reality. And so the brain truth crush the earth is going to rise. So the 2 series of ball games are big brown and small white. Small white. Big brown. That is paying tribute to the genetic dominance of the testicles of men of color, black men in particular. You see, so big brown is football, basketball, bowling ball. Are you all with me? Some people put soccer over here. It's got a little white cover, but the black shows through. Small white marbles. Ping pong. Golf. Are you all with me? See, it even goes further than that. I said the culture that is not created by black people. In the culture, white females say their ideal mate is tall, dark, and handsome. So these brown balls, the football goes into some white upright legs at the end. And then you have white girls in short skirts dancing on the side, and black girls can't get on the squat. And then you have a whole audience of voyeurs, mostly white males, looking at white females being satisfied by a big brown ball. Are you with me, Clay? See, I didn't get it. So what game do the most powerful white men play? How is that game played?
They're working on it.
Oh, listen, you want to be careful because that ceiling is going to come down.
Nobody
See, a little white ball. We must go forward. The little white ball is going into a hole in black Mother Earth. You see, carrying out the concept. And it even goes further because golf courses are designed. That's big business, the design and the layout of the golf course, right? And so the golf course, let's say it's laid out, and the little ball can get misplaced and it can go into the rough. Yeah, see, there's some adults who know that. See, I'm a physician, and so we got to point that. It can go into the water hole. That's not where it's supposed to be. It can go into the sand trap. See, there are 3 holes in female genital anatomy. There's only one right hole. It's laid out in the design of the golf course. You don't understand. In other words, this is the brain computer working overtime, dealing with a reality that there is avoidance in talking about. The one topic that you cannot talk about in the system of racism, white supremacy, is racism, white supremacy. You see, if you try to talk about it, somebody, well, she's playing the race card. Anything to pull you away. The incident in Charleston happens, and immediately the news has to be switched to bad black man raping white female. You see, now what he did or what he didn't do, I don't know. But some of the females kept coming back. And these are not little children. These are all adult people. See, and I heard some kinds of sexual experience. Now, unless he was forcing these pills down somebody's throat, they were taking them. Right. You know what the story is, and I'm not saying that he was doing anything that people didn't know about and harming people. Of course, that's not correct. But I'm talking about the bigger picture of the dynamics of racism and how to get black people diverted from what they need to be focusing on. Because when there is a fear of genetic annihilation, that one group of people has such powerful genetic material that they can cause another group's annihilation, the answer for the people who are afraid is genocide. Let me make that clear. Genocide. We are sitting and looking at genocide take place right in front of us. Anytime the men of a people are being killed, those people are under genocide. There's no such thing as a people consisting of just females. See, I don't care how much anybody preaches same-sex marriage. Any people that want to project their existence thousands of generations into the future cannot say male, male, female, female is the same as male, female. You see, and I could be the psychiatrist to white people. See, I would say you need to be very careful. See, white people are not operating with insight. They are operating with having developed a power machine to kill whatever number of people they need to kill wherever they are in the world. But that's not operating with insight. You see, but if I were the psychiatrist, I would say you need to be very careful. Because if you don't like the way that you look, as evidenced by your suntanning, and evidenced by putting tattoos all over your body, see, it's like inking up or tanning up. If your brain computer has decided, I don't like the way I look, then you will not be in the business of procreating. You will be in the business of causing your own demise. Do you follow what I'm saying? So let me just go back here. Front view of male genitalia. Lateral view. If you turn this around 90 degrees, you have this. And what is that? A gun. And what is the gun called? The great equalizer. Meaning, my genetics are not as powerful as yours. Must create weapon can do same thing. So that's the gun. You see, if you remember some of the pictures of Darrell Storm Roof, where he's sitting with the Confederate flag and a big black gun between his legs. See, maybe all of those pictures from the East Coast haven't hit here. See, which then takes us to, see, even the culture will call, in the white culture, white men will call themselves sons of guns. Son of a gun. Because the gun has replaced in their thinking what their genetic material will not do. Okay, so looking even further, that all of the talk about the flag, this is a flag. loose abstractions. So this is the lateral view of the male genitalia. That's the same as this. All of the flags, basically, of the white cultures are red, white, and blue, or blue and white, or red and white. The flag stands symbolically for what is in the testicles. For people who classify themselves as white, it means white skin, through which you can see red arterioles and blue veins. That's why the flag is not something you can tamper with easily. So after the flag, people talking about the flag coming down, then black churches were burned. You see, black people have tended, because they're not focusing on total system structure of racism, they will start talking about police brutality. The police are simply the first line of defense in a culture. The second line of defense is the National Guard. The third line is the Army. And so the police are just the people who are authorized to commit justifiable homicide. See, in medicine, you don't have patients just talking about the symptoms. You have to get down to the disease. Because if you're just focusing on the symptoms, a patient will die. You've got to say, what is causing X, Y, Z? Let me find out, if I can, what is the cause. And I say that when we see all of these killings all across the country, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, all of the killings that are taking place of black males. See, they used to lynch and castrate one black male who looked at a white female. Now you have the highest incidence in the history of this country of white women with black men. You see, that is not passing by without notice. The white collective that is concerned consciously and or subconsciously with white genetic survival. Are you following me? You see, so while they want to say post-racial, make no mistake. See, this is why it's important to have a definition. I have the only one-paragraph definition of racism, white supremacy. And I've advertised in the newspaper. Does anybody have a better explanation? I've even offered $1,000. Does anybody have a better explanation? Why? Because in my explanation of what racism and white supremacy, if it's not right, I don't need it. But I'm the only psychiatrist in the United States who has talked about racism for 40 plus years. I'm the only psychiatrist in the country. It's a tragedy. This is a tragedy. See, in my graduation present from college, my parents said, "What do you want for graduation?" And, you know, sometimes maybe I needed a psychiatrist because I didn't say, "Get me a car, get me some clothes." I said, "Send me to Germany." This is 1957, 12 years after the end of the Second World War. And I told my parents, I want to go to Germany and live with German people. And ask them, did they understand what they allowed to happen to their neighbors? And I was in a work camp outside of Frankfurt. And young German people were going around doing Heil Hitler with swastikas. Christians. And I would say, don't do that because I'm the only black person there. They had an article in the newspaper, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Brown Francis from Chicago is here. You see, but what I learned from that experience is that people can appear nice on the surface. I asked this coming to our house, but they will allow their neighbors to be killed under certain circumstances. See, I advocate that every black person should study the history of Nazi Germany. See, because there has been the focus on the religion of some of the victims. If you read Hitler's work,
that's right.
He said, I don't care about their religion.
That's right.
I'm not interested in the religion.
That's right.
He said, I'm going to kill 11 million Semites
He sure did say that.
of the Jewish religion because they're not white.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, they may look white, but for white people, like I some time ago talked to a person from Scandinavia. Scandinavia, we don't consider Italians nor Jews to be white people. So in other words, and that kind of takes me to the case in Spokane, Washington. Thank you. The young black woman who wasn't certain who she was. See, but I don't knock her. Because when I saw in the news a picture of her mother looked like a black lady who's passing. See, if you are a person of a certain age, like I'm 80, but I'm only saying that just means that my generation of people were closer to the generations immediately after slavery, where you had tons of black people who could pass for white because of the activity of the slave master. So you have a lot of people, families and family members, the ones who thought they could pass and get ahead, well, we're going to pass. And then the ones, you had some that could pass for white, and they decided they weren't going to pass. You see, but you have people who decided. My grandmother had a cousin. They came up from Vicksburg, Mississippi. That's where my paternal grandmother's people came from. Slave master producing some brown black people. And so my grandmother had a cousin, and she was like my grandmother, but she said, now Lou, when you come to visit, please go to the back door because they don't know I'm black. I mean, you have to see, in other words, if we knew our history, see, just look at this audience. There's hardly anybody in here who's crystal black. Meaning the slave master's brush has been all over this audience. And all over black people. You see, and black people falling in line, don't marry anybody darker than yourself. All of that stuff. See, everybody hug yourself. Hug yourself. Now repeat after me. I love myself. I mean, I really love myself. And I thank the Creator for giving me the courage to talk about difficult subjects. And racism is the most difficult subject. Okay, Okay, so in other words, see, I'm not talking about racism so that black people can get on a jag about hating white people. That's cheap. The purpose in talking about racism, white supremacy, is that racism, white supremacy is the most vicious, most terroristic system that has ever been on earth. That sees as its enemy the majority people on the planet. So the point of talking about it is so that racism as a total local, national, global system can be replaced with a system of justice. Justice meaning no one is mistreated. No one is allowed to be mistreated. And those who need the most help get the most help. So that's the purpose of talking about racism. But look at this word. A-M-E-R-I-C-A. And right sitting in that word is the phrase, I am race. See, now, how does that happen? Don't know. Just like the word Jesus, J-E-S-U-S. In Ebonics, that's just us. Okay, all right, we need a 5-minute break, but let me just say, black people are waiting on Jesus. That should waiting on ourselves.
I hate to interrupt, but we got to take a 5-minute break because he's going to get up there and get the pan out of the roof, out the tile. So let's take a 5-minute break and we'll close it right back on. Okay? Thank you.